The sky was an uncertain watercolor of gray and faint indigo, a fragile curtain pulled back on the world. Along the ridgeline of Crestwood Heights, bare autumn trees swayed in a cold wind that hadn't yet been warmed by the sun. The silence was profound, broken only by the low, steady hum of an engine and the soft, sleepy cadence of a radio program playing in an SUV. Inside the vehicle, Ava Sterling, 38, gripped a steel coffee mug. The warmth seeped into her fingers, a small anchor against the chill of the morning. Her mind, however, was already at work, a quiet engine of its own. She wore her uniform of discipline, a sharp coat, her dark hair pulled back neatly, and she was used to starting her day earlier than her colleagues. It was a habit born of a preference for avoiding the quiet, unspoken questions that lingered in the office hallways later in the morning, questions that didn't need words to ask. What are you doing in this neighborhood? Her black SUV rolled through a perfectly empty intersection. The world felt still, a tableau of cold suburbia. And then, without warning, the stillness was shattered. In her rear-view mirror, red and blue lights flared to life, a stark, aggressive punctuation mark on the peaceful morning. Ava's hands remained steady on the wheel as she pulled over. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of observation and analysis, went to work immediately. She hadn't run a light. She hadn't been speeding. Her phone was in the cup holder. No violation. No one else on the road. Just her and the cop. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. This was not a traffic stop. This was something else. The window came down, a slow, deliberate descent that let the cold air sweep in. A white officer, a man in his early 40s with set jaw and sunglasses, leaned into the frame. His stare was a judgment before he even spoke. "Good morning. License and registration, please." Ava handed them over, her movements calm and unhurried. He took them with a dismissive flick of his wrist, barely glancing at them before asking the question she knew was coming. "So, what brings you to this neighborhood this early?" She tilted her head slightly, a gesture of feigned confusion. "Driving to work." "Why?" Her answer didn't please him. "We've had some unusual traffic around here lately. Folks don't usually cut through Crestwood Heights unless they're up to something. You live here?" She didn't, but she lived close, and she worked for an agency that he couldn't possibly imagine her being a part of. Inside her palm, her silver ring spun once, a quiet, almost imperceptible habit she used to keep her composure. She had been pulled over 3 times this year, always for a different, vague reason. But the root cause was always the same. She knew this game. She had studied it, deconstructed it, and taught others how to navigate it. Answer too fast. You're hiding something. Get frustrated. You're aggressive. Stay silent. You're uncooperative. "I'm on my way to the federal building on West 48th, she said, slowly and clearly. A raised eyebrow. A full body scan from his eyes. Why would someone like her work there? Ava met his gaze with a stillness made of steel. There was no fear, no reaction, just a calm, unyielding presence. He asked the question that was the true point of this encounter. "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" Ava didn't move immediately. She let the question hang in the chilled morning air, a test of patience, of fear, of how much authority he could assert before she pushed back. This was the beginning of a mistake he couldn't undo. "Is there a legal reason for a search?" she asked. Her voice was not defiant, but deliberate. She was not a victim in this scenario. She was a participant in a ritual she understood perfectly. The officer's jaw tensed. He hadn't expected her to speak the language of rights so fluently. He glanced at her back seat, then back at her face, as if trying to locate a reason that hadn't happened yet. "Just routine," he said, the lies sounding thin even to his own ears. "You know, with all the carjackings lately, we've been asked to keep an eye out for anything out of place." Carjackings. Ava almost smiled. It was always a vague threat, an official-sounding excuse that could hold up in court, but would disappear if truly pressed. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Discreetly mounted near her dashboard, a federal-issued dash cam had been recording since the moment his siren lights came on. It was standard protocol for internal investigators like her. No sudden moves, no negotiations. Just capture the truth as it reveals itself. Ava worked in the Bureau's Office of Professional Conduct. Her job was to investigate misconduct, often within law enforcement itself. She reviewed camera footage, analyzed body cam gaps, and unearthed policy violations buried in paperwork. She had built cases against officers who looked just like this one, men who believed they were beyond scrutiny. She looked up at the officer, who stood there like her silence was a personal insult. "If you'd like to issue a citation," she said, her voice even, almost gentle but layered with steel, "I'd be happy to contest it formally." He stepped back, annoyed but uncertain. He could escalate, call for backup, claim she was uncooperative, or he could let it go and pretend it never happened. His hand hovered near his radio. Ava saw it, logged it mentally, and said nothing. Then, with a slow, non-threatening movement, she reached down and pressed her thumb against a small, flat button beneath the steering column. A silent ping was sent directly to Bureau systems. Nothing flashy, just a timestamp, a location, a signal that the situation had crossed a line. And at headquarters, someone had just received it. She sat for a few more seconds, giving herself space to breathe. The coffee in her cup holder was now lukewarm. Her thumb lingered near the button, not out of fear, but out of calculation. This wasn't the first time she had to weigh the moment. When to speak, when to wait, when to remind someone that she wasn't just another silhouette in the driver's seat. He stepped back to his patrol car, making a show of checking her documents in his in-car terminal, though Ava knew he hadn't typed a thing. It was theater, a performance of authority. He tapped the trunk of her SUV as if testing it for weakness. Ava narrowed her eyes. That tap, offhand, territorial, was exactly the kind of detail that would never show up in a report, but meant everything to someone paying attention. Inside the federal building, she was Agent Sterling. Her name sat on reports circulated to Washington. Out here, none of that mattered. She was black, she was alone, and she was in the wrong zip code. She remembered a hearing just 2 months ago where a young officer had defended an unjustified stop by saying the driver looked out of place. That was all it took. 4 words. Out of place. Officer Mitchell returned to her window, a hint of smug certainty now in his demeanor. "Everything seems clean," he said, but still didn't hand back her license. "Just being cautious, with everything going on in the news lately." Ava's voice didn't waver. "You stopped me without cause. That's not caution. That's profiling." He bristled. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to keep the community safe." "You've seen my ID," she said, her tone colder now. "You've had my registration. You've inspected my vehicle visually. Unless you plan to file a report, I suggest you return my license." He hesitated. The moment lingered too long. His authority was shrinking, slowly, subtly, but she could feel it. Then, as if to reassert control, he glanced into the back seat again. "What's in the case?" he asked, nodding toward a black hardshell briefcase. "Documents," she answered. "May I take a look?" His eyebrow raised. She met it with silence. There was a tension there that went beyond this stop. It was institutional, historic. Her father had taught her, as a teenager, what to do when, not if, she was pulled over. Her brother hadn't been so lucky. A minor citation had turned into an arrest that cost him 2 years of college and a permanent record. That's what made her furious. Not the inconvenience, but the fact that this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. Finally, he handed her license back. "All right," he said, but there was no apology, just an exhale of annoyance. "Drive safe." She took the license, put it away, and didn't thank him. As she pulled away, she drove slowly, deliberately, watching his car shrink in her mirror. She knew he was watching. Men like him always watched until they couldn't anymore. 5 minutes later, she arrived at the parking garage below the federal building. The guard at the gate recognized her instantly. "Morning, Agent Sterling." "Morning," she said. As the gate lifted, she felt her shoulders begin to relax, but the pressure didn't fade completely. Not yet. She parked, shut off the engine, and sat in the silence of the SUV. She reached for her phone, opened the secure recording app, and uploaded the footage. She filed it under unjustified stop, Suburban Precinct 6A, and added a note. Subject did not cite legal cause, showed resistance to procedural clarity. Dash cam footage active throughout. She didn't need to be angry in the report. She just needed it to exist. Because the truth didn't always roar. Sometimes it just waited, documented, dated, filed, ready. Ava hadn't planned to mention the stop. Encounters like that had a way of lingering quietly, too small to spark outrage, too common to report. But something about the officer's smirk, the way he said, "Drive safe," as if he still owned the last word, stayed with her. At 8:06 a.m., she forwarded the footage to her superior, Special Agent in Charge Deborah Thorne, with a simple message: surveillance field incident. Suggest review. Possible pattern match. Deborah was sharp, tough, and importantly, white. She responded in under 5 minutes. "I'll bring this to oversight." "You okay?" Ava replied, "I'm fine, just tired." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. By noon, word had reached the Bureau's internal affairs team. Not because Ava had made a scene, but because her stop mirrored 2 others from the same precinct, both involving black professionals driving in or near Crestwood Heights. None had filed formal complaints. All had been recorded on similar dash cams. Ava's case, however, was different. She was one of theirs, and that changed everything. The second point of shift came from outside Ava's control. Officer Mitchell had no idea his casual stop was about to land on the desk of someone who outranked every supervisor he'd ever answered to. Around 1:30 p.m., he received a formal contact notice from a Bureau liaison requesting clarification. He was told to submit a written report within 24 hours. At first, he didn't panic. He figured he could explain away, call a routine patrol a misread situation. But when he logged into the portal and saw the timestamp matched Ava Sterling's plate, his stomach turned. He'd heard her name before somewhere. And then it hit him. She'd been quoted in a departmental memo on racial bias protocols. He paced for 15 minutes before sitting down to write the report. He didn't lie, not fully, but he left out the wrong neighborhood comment. He avoided the bit about asking to search her vehicle without probable cause. He said she was calm, non-cooperative, and that he felt it prudent to assess her presence due to increased criminal activity in the area. It was textbook cover language, ambiguous enough to dodge consequences. Or so he thought. The third point of shift came when the footage was played aloud. At 4:10 p.m., the Bureau's Internal Review Board met in a closed session. Ava was in the room, but her voice was calm, even, sharp. The phrase, "That's not caution. That's profiling," hit like a quiet bullet. The board watched in silence. Not because the video was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was routine, and that made it worse. They saw the moment power shifted from unspoken authority to conscious restraint. Ava never raised her voice. She never revealed her badge. She didn't need to. Her presence, her silence, her refusal to perform the script expected of her. Those were her weapons. By 5 p.m., the board made 3 decisions. First, they would formally audit Officer Mitchell's stop history for the past 12 months. Second, they would notify the precinct commander of a pending ethics review. And third, they would recommend using Ava's footage in a new training module, Bias in Practice, recognizing the non-obvious patterns. Ava didn't hear about any of it until the next morning. When she arrived at her office, Deborah Thorne handed her a sealed folder. Inside was a memo marked Confidential Internal Action. It listed her name as field contributor and detailed the recommendations approved by the oversight panel. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Thorne. "You did the right thing. Quiet counts, too." Ava didn't smile. She didn't feel victorious. She felt measured, a little heavier, but not alone. She left the folder on her desk and walked to the window. The city moved in slow patterns below. People crossing streets, buses hissing to a halt, bikes weaving between cars. Nothing remarkable. But for the first time in a long while, Ava allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the right kind of silence could shift something. A week after the footage was submitted, an internal analytics team flagged a pattern. Same precinct, same neighborhood, same hour of day. The officers changed, the excuses shifted, but the targets rarely did. Black drivers, especially women, were stopped more often near Crestwood Heights than anywhere else in the surrounding city. None of those stops resulted in arrests. None revealed contraband. But every single one was logged as preventative. That word had become a shield. Ava watched the numbers accumulate on her screen. They didn't scream. They whispered. A quiet, damning accumulation of unchecked power. Her case wasn't unique. It was typical. That was the real danger. She forwarded the report to Deputy Director Ramos with short note. This isn't about one stop. It's about a culture. Ramos responded in person. He stopped by her office 2 days later, leaned on the doorframe, and said, "I need you to brief Justice." She looked up. "The DOJ?" He nodded. "And not just on your case. On this." He pointed to the report glowing on her screen. That's when Ava realized this wasn't a sidebar anymore. This was a case file with legs. The Department of Justice scheduled a private policy briefing. Ava walked them through the footage, not just hers, but 2 other clips showing similar exchanges. Different officers, same language. "You don't look like you're from around here. Just a precaution. We've had break-ins." She let the silence do the work between clips. Then she pulled up the precinct's stop history, overlaid with demographic heat maps. The disparity was not arguable. It was math. This wasn't reported to IA. No formal complaints, one of the attorneys noted. Because most people who get stopped like this, they don't complain. Ava replied, "They just want to get home." She continued, "This isn't about bad apples. It's about the environment that tells those apples they'll never rot." When the meeting ended, the liaison stood up and said, "We'll be issuing a recommendation, not just to that precinct, but to every suburban department with similar metrics." Ava nodded. Something in her chest lifted. That same week, the Bureau's internal ethics panel issued a memo. All officers in zones flagged for demographic disparity would be required to undergo a mandatory review, partially informed by Ava's footage. Her recording, once an isolated act of self-preservation, was now federal training material. Meanwhile, Officer Mitchell's record was reopened. 5 prior stops, previously dismissed, were now under formal review. The officer who had once smirked at Ava's restraint was suddenly answering questions he couldn't brush off. But the shift wasn't just bureaucratic. It was cultural. Ava began receiving emails, quiet ones from other agents, officers, even dispatchers. Saw the training video. "Thank you. I didn't realize how bad it looked until I watched it back. You held your ground. That means more than you know." She read each one, but responded to only a few. She wasn't interested in applause. She was interested in follow-through. One email stood out. It came from a black sergeant in a neighboring county. He wrote, "My niece drives through that neighborhood every morning to get to school. I used to tell her to keep her head down. Now I tell her to keep a dash cam. It's not justice yet, but it's a start." Ava printed that one and taped it inside her locker because it reminded her what happened that morning wasn't just about a single stop. It was about the invisible script written into sidewalks, into silence, into the way some neighborhoods were allowed to feel protected and others were policed. It took a federal badge, a hidden camera, and a whole lot of quiet endurance to prove what thousands already knew. And even then, she knew it was enough. But it was movement. That night, Ava stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her tie undone, her jacket still on hours after the day had ended. Her apartment was quiet, just the hum of the city pressing faintly against a window. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't feel victorious. She felt something colder, something steadier, a sense of moral weight finally being noticed, but not yet lifted. She replayed the stop in her head for the 100th time. Not because she doubted her actions, but because she knew how close it had come to going differently. What if she had spoken faster or moved more quickly? What if her voice had cracked? What if she hadn't been a federal agent? That last thought haunted her the most. She thought about all the drivers who wouldn't have had the badge, the recording, or the privilege of being believed. For every Ava Sterling with federal credentials, there are thousands of people just like her, same skin, same voice, same zip code, who never got to submit a clip, never saw their footage turn into policy. Justice, she realized, didn't always look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looked like a document, quietly refiled. Sometimes it looked like a new training video sent out to 1,000 inboxes. Sometimes it looked like a man being forced to rethink a decision he once thought harmless. But real justice had to go deeper. It couldn't depend on who held the badge. It couldn't rely on who had the camera. It had to be built into the very instinct of those who swore to protect. The next morning, Ava showed up to work early. She wore the same jacket from that day, but this time she pinned a small lapel pin beneath the collar. It wasn't standard issue. It was a gift from a colleague who had watched the footage and simply said, "You reminded me what this badge is supposed to be for." She walked into the conference room and pulled up the latest draft of the training module. Her voice narrated the clip, now calm, measured. She didn't perform outrage. She performed accountability. She hit play. The screen showed the moment of pause, the silence, the question, "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" Then her voice steady. "Is there a legal reason for search?" It was subtle, but it was a shift. Justice didn't roar in that clip. It didn't arrest anyone, but it told the truth. And for now, that was enough. For now. She was content knowing that the next officer to watch this footage would hear her voice before making the same mistake. And maybe, just maybe, that would change something.